Prussia, dismantled by the Allies in 1947 as a bearer of militarism and reaction from its early days. Yet others saw Prussia for a long time as a rational and progressive alternative to the Habsburg Empire or Bonapartist France. And these were just two viewpoints. An even more striking example was that both the Nazis and the German resistance against Hitler referred to Prussian values and traditions. Similar to Erwin Rommel, the myth and the history of Prussia are hard to distinguish from each other, and simple answers are hard to find without an ideological lens of oversimplification or other clear-cut agendas. Yet although there are many interpretations and perspectives about Prussia and its role in history, the impact and capabilities of Prussian infantry on the battlefield under Frederick the Great is less complicated. Frederick the Great inherited Prussia and its army from his father Frederick William I in 1740. Although this army was rather weak on the cavalry side due to William's focus on infantry, the infantry was well trained and disciplined, and soon proved to be very effective in many battles. Thus, soon the Prussian infantry earned a fearsome reputation in Europe, and we should not forget that the infantry made up the majority of the troops, so the Prussian army had a strong core, which was crucial when fighting with England against Austria, France, Russia, Sweden and many other German states in the 7 Years' War. The quality of Prussian infantry and the leadership of Frederick the Great, and also luck, was one of the reasons Prussia could prevail in that war. But at first, let's look at the infantry. Note that the various infantry types were rather similar to other countries at that time, although there are a few exceptions in naming. Like in other countries, the Garde, the Royal Gard, were the most elite troops. Of 4 Guard battalions, the 1st battalion of the Leibgarde or House Guard was the best of the best under Frederick and had around 1,000 men. This was his favorite unit and he used it to test new tactics but also to intimidate or impress foreign guests. Additionally, it was used to train officers both foreign and domestic. This included also officers that were sloppy in the past and thus got a special refreshment course. Note that the various guard units weren't uniform in appearance. For instance, they had different heads. And this was the case with other units as well. The next unit were the Grenadiers or Grenadiere. Grenadiers go back to the 7th century. These men threw, as the name suggests, granite-like explosives. Yet back then one had to ready such a grenade with a burning fuse, which are not that reliable in terms of timing. Additionally, the weight was around 1 to 1.5 kg. For comparison, a German potato smasher in World War II had a weight of about 0.3 kg. Thus a grenadier needed quite some strength and also guts. As such, grenadier units were considered elite at that time. Although around the mid-18th century grenadiers often didn't carry any grenades anymore, specifically 1743 the Prussian grenadiers stopped carrying grenades, they were equipped with regular muskets as other infantry units. Nevertheless, they were still an elite unit within the Prussian army. This is also reflected by the recruiting process, where musketeers were recruited based on the regional conscription system. Grenadiers were recruited from veterans of existing musketeer units under the following conditions. Eine vorausgegangene Mindestdienstzeit von 2 Jahren sowie eine besondere Zuverlässigkeit, Ausdauer und Angriffsfreude waren Voraussetzung für die Übernahme. A previous minimum service period of 2 years as well as a special reliability, perseverance and a willingness to attack were a prerequisite for the takeover. A main difference from the appearance to the musketeers was that the grenadiers maintained their distinctive head, which was high instead of a broad head. This of course goes back to the original role, because the broad head was rather cumbersome to use while throwing grenades at the enemy. Only in 1787 it was replaced with a regular head. Another important difference was that each grenadier company had 6 carpenters with axes. These were used to destroy any field fortifications like cheval de frise, which were portable anti-cavalry barriers. Note that later these carpenters were moved into other units. Next up are the most regular troops, the Musketeers or Musketiere. If someone joined the Prussian army, he usually ended up in the Musketeer unit. Like many soldiers before and after them, they had to carry quite a lot of equipment and weapons, around 25 kilograms, and marches during wartime were often around 20 to 25 kilometers. Hence musketeers were quite sturdy, especially since the placement of those items was rather impractical by modern standards. To quote from the memoirs of the soldier Becker, Jeder war bebündelt wie ein Esel, erst mit einem Degengurt umschnallt, dann die Patronentasche über die Schulter und einem 5 Zoll langen Riemen über die andere Achsel, der Tornister mit Wäsche bepackt, in dem der Habersack mit Brot und andere Fourage gestopft. Hier nichts musste jeder von ein Stück Feldgerät tragen, Flasche, Kessel, Haken oder sowas. Alles an Riemen. Dann erst noch eine Flinte, auch an einem solchen. So waren wir alle 5-mal miteinander kreuzweise über die Brust geschlossen, dass jeder anfangs glaubt, unter solcher Last ersticken zu müssen. Everyone was wrapped like a donkey, first strapped with a rapier belt, then the patron's bag over the shoulder and a 5-inch long strap over the armpit of the knapsack packed with laundry, etc. The haber's bag was stuffed with bread and other forage. Additionally, everyone had to carry a piece of field equipment, bottle, kettles, hooks or something, all on belts. And also the musket. So we had straps all crossed over the chest 5 times. Each one was believing in the beginning that he would suffocate under such a load. Due to these physical requirements, the ideal age was 18 years, whereas the maximum age was around 48 years. Note that until 1918, the name Musketiere was used in the Prussian army. Next are the Fusiliers or Fusiliere. When the matchlock musket was replaced by flintlocks, many countries renamed their musketeers into Fusiliers. Well, Prussia didn't. Nevertheless, the term Fusilier was also used in the Prussian army. Besides the short early use in 1723, Fusiliers during Frederick's time were units that were raised after the conquest of Silesia. These Fusiliers were usually smaller and from conquered provinces, thus Frederick regarded them as less loyal. They were usually used in the second line, due to them being shorter than musketeers. They were deemed less capable in bayonet fights. In terms of appearance, they had a similar head as the Grenadiers, which were considered elite. Thus one author suspects that this was done to distract from the second rate of these troops in appearance, or even to confuse the enemy reconnaissance. Next is a unit type that was used only in rather small numbers. The Feldjäger zu Fuß, which means literally huntsman on foot. Generally in German the term Jäger means hunter, but is usually used for light infantry in a military context. And with additional term to indicate special capabilities, for instance Gebirgsjäger for mountain troops, Fallschirmjäger for paratroopers. So Jäger is usually an indication for light infantry. Unsurprisingly, Feldjäger were basically light infantry that performed scouting and sharpshooting duties. In the First Silesian War, they only made up around 60 men, yet they were continually expanded, thus in 1784 reaching a total number of 1,200 men. They were mainly recruited from foresters and forest officials. This had several benefits. First, they were experienced with difficult terrain, or even knew the terrain themselves. Second, they were loyal, which decreased the chances of desertion, a major issue at the time. After all, these units were operating away from the main force. Their appearance was quite different to regular infantry. The uniforms were mostly brownish and greenish, unlike regular infantry with blue, white and other non-subtle colors. In terms of equipment, they had 2 main weapons, light muskets and hunting rifles with large calibers, since these were ideally for long-range precision fire. Furthermore, they often had dogs with them and were quite informal compared to the other troops. Another infantry types in small numbers were the pioneers or pioniere. These units were restructured several times. Some parts moved from the artillery to the pioneers and back. Many of the members were minors, yet for the most part they were only used as a regular infantry unit. Although at one point they made up a whole regiment, the pioneers were reduced in size again. Now if you're a bit short for a stormtrooper but still want to fight for the Prussian Empire, well, you can join the Garnisonstruppen or Garrison Troops. Basically, if you were under 1.65 meters, this was your way in. For the defense of fortifications, smaller and lighter muskets were considered to be fine, which also meant that the physical restrictions were less severe. Although, since 1756, Garrison troops occasionally also served in the field. The next group was the Free Battalions or Freibataillone. These units should support the Feldjägers in recon and skirmish duties. Yet they varied widely in quality. The first ones were made up by volunteers of motivated and unemployed men. Yet the next wave consisted mostly of prisoners of war, who only served properly with the right leadership. Yet the third wave consisted only from prisoners of war, deserters and criminals. Thus the Free Battalions had a rather bad reputation. After the 7 Years' War, Frederick brought them into fortresses where they were disarmed and disbanded. And the final type was of course the Militia or Miliz. Joining the militia was open to men from 18 to 20 years of age. and required a 6-year term. And this also meant that these men were exempted from regular military service and a guarantee that they would be used only domestically. Originally, the militias were disbanded by Frederick's father, but once Prussia was facing the risk of invasion, Frederick recreated the militia. They had no special uniforms, but shoulder straps, neckties and other clothing elements in combination with regular clothing gave them some kind of military look. The weapons were either private arms or from local weapon depots. Additionally, they received bayonets and other military equipment, yet they had no sabers. Their usage was quite varied. It ranged from fighting looters or reinforcing garrison troops in fortresses. Some were even used with the regular field army, yet the main purpose was the initial training of volunteers and conscripts for the field army. Time to take a short look at organization. Note that there was quite some differences between each regiment, and especially during wartime there were many losses. So take these numbers as a general guideline. According to Martin Guddat, the intended range of an infantry regiment in 1743 was 50 officers, 118 NCOs, 252 Grenadiers, 1140 Musketeers, 37 drummers, and 30 men in various roles in the regimental support units. To give you some relation for these numbers, let's compare them to a German infantry regiment from 1940. Now first, a little context. In 1940, a regiment was usually part of an infantry division, whereas for the most of the 18th century, the regiment remained the basic infantry administrative unit throughout Europe. Tactically, the formation was the battalion. On active service, it was generally the custom to group 2 or 3 regiments or battalions into brigades. But as with cavalry, these were essentially ad hoc and temporary formations. Additionally, there are some discrepancies in terms of roles, yet the main focus here is on the ratios of officers, NCOs and enlisted men. Thus the streamlined numbers are as follows: 50 officers versus 75 in 1940, 118 NCOs versus 493, 1,392 enlisted men versus 2,474, and 67 officials and musicians versus 7 officials in 1940, for a total of 1,560 versus 3,042 men. So in total the number of men almost doubled. And at first the regiment looks rather different. Well, let's look at the percentages. Well, it seems the officer ratio didn't change much, but the relative numbers of NCOs almost doubled. This of course has to do with the fact that in modern armies, NCOs are often fulfilling specialist positions that require technical expertise. In terms of enlisted men, the number only changed slightly. But back to the infantry regiment of 1743, which itself was organized in 2 equal battalions. Now the question is, how would these men line up on the battlefield? Well, the combat formation is without grenadiers and would ideally look like this. As you can see, the units were set up in 3 rows with 8 platoons, where each platoon was basically surrounded by officers and NCOs. Additionally, on the flanks and the center there were musicians, and in the middle there were flag carriers. Well, I hope this gives you some basic insights into Prussian infantry under Frederick the Great. And if you like what I do, consider supporting me on Patreon. Every dollar helps. Special thanks to Tech Arrow here for helping me out on this video. Now if you're into more contemporary stuff, maybe this video on urban combat is something for you. But I can also offer you some detailed insights into a Panzer Grenadier division. As always, sources in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.